Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Exploring the Lord of the Rings. Good to be back with you this evening. I know I didn't miss it feels weird because I missed every other broadcast that I do last week, except for Exploring the Lord of the Rings. So I feel like I've been gone, but of course, here I haven't been. But good to be here on Crick Hollow. Good to be to see you guys again as we continue our methodical journey through Book 2, Chapter 1. Okay, so first of all, actually, before I start, announcements as usual. There are not very many announcements this week. Just a couple quick things. First, to note, I've been announcing we're gonna have the next session of the Mythgard Movie Club this week on Thursday, where we were going to talk about Camelot the musical, but we have to postpone that. We're going to still do it, but we can't do that this week. We've had one of the organizers had a death in the family and isn't able to be there, so we're just gonna postpone that until later on. So stay tuned for when that's going to happen later on. But it won't be this Thursday. That we know for sure. Second thing is we're in the last fortnight now for registration for Mythmoot. So I've been seeing a few more registrations coming in over the last couple of days, which is great. We still have some room. There's a really, really wonderful crowd of people, as always, coming to Mythmoot. It figures to be a really wonderful time, as always. So I hope that you'll be able to come join us there. And don't forget, if you can't make it to Leesburg, Virginia, for Mythmoot, you can still join us virtually through our new Mootcast option. So please do look into that. That's all at signumuniversity.org/Mythmoot. You can find all of the information on those things. So anyway, lots of great things happening there. Still hoping to do our reenactment of the flight to the ford there, and the positioning of the riders and everything. Looking forward to working out the flight to the ford at Mythmoot here. I'm kind of wondering, I'm not sure when on the schedule exactly we're going to do it, and whether or not we might end up doing it. I'm like, are we going to do it in the middle of the night? Which could be cool. We always have a nice big crowd out at the fire pits in the evening. So, it might be kind of fun. We'll see. I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but it's totally going to happen. So anyhow, I am looking forward to Mythmoot. All right. Now, to move back in, there's a bunch of really good comments on the discussion board this week, but I'm not going to bring any of them in here, but I wanted to address a sort of broader question, and I thought I would bring you with my favorite visual adaptation, my favorite visual image of the flood at the Ford of Bruinen. This is, of course, from Ted Naismith. You'll notice that, of course, although we get lots of shining white horses with shining white riders, we don't get any boulders of any kind, right? The boulders are completely left out from this image. So there's Ted Naismith's solution to the boulder dilemma. Anyway, exactly. Mudmore is just saying, where are the boulders? Exactly. That's the problem. Okay. So what I wanted to just address briefly, don't worry, I'm not going to talk about the boulders again. Although what I am going to talk briefly about talking about the boulders. I want to make sure everybody understands what I'm doing and why. There are times, right, when we go slow enough under the best of circumstances, and there are times when I really linger on a passage, and I want to make sure everybody understands why I'm doing that. As I've explained this before, but it's worth repeating. This read through of the Lord of the Rings that we're doing together has been something. This is like, well, I'd say a lifelong dream for me, except like this is never something I ever imagined doing. So it's not like I specifically imagined and dreamed of this kind of thing. But this really, as we have been doing it, it has come to fulfill a great and long-standing desire of mine to go through the text and really try. My goal in this discussion is to emerge with an explanation, not the explanation. Not, I'm sure many people could come up with better explanations and will at various points, but I want to come out of our discussions on every passage in the entire Lord of the Rings with an explanation for every single question that I have. I'm never going to get the chance to study this text more in depth than we're doing right now, right? It's now or never, so I'm going to do this, okay? So when I stop and pause, and there will be times, like I know many of you are not totally into the boulders discussion or didn't see what the issue was. If you're not seeing what the issue was, then that's my fault. Just say that, and that's my fault. I need to explain a little bit more clearly what the issue is. But I'm not generally, a verb that comes up a lot when we're, looking really closely at the text is nitpicking. I certainly hope not to be merely picking nits. It's an unpleasant activity in the best of circumstances. The goal is not that. The goal is to find a reading that satisfies and to not only answer the questions, but in some cases figure out what the questions are. For me, the boulders discussion was very, very fruitful, and I hope that some of you had sufficient patience to bear with me until the end of it, because what I felt came out at the end was something which was for me a brand new reading of this passage that had never occurred to me. If I hadn't been laboring over the question of are these spiritual or physical boulders, I would never have arrived at two things, really. First, a clearer understanding of what Gandalf is doing, what he was describing doing in the flood scene. And secondly, and even more importantly, a little bit more of an insight into Gandalf's power as a whole. Like, what is Gandalf's magic and how does it work? So that final reading that we sort of settled on at the end about Gandalf augmenting the Loudwater, of his sort of encouraging and empowering the spirit of the river, right, to increase the vigor of the flood and the strength of the flood, which led to the rolling of the rolling and grinding of large boulders because of the amplification of the flood, which Elrond commanded and then Gandalf augmented. That to me is a really satisfying reading. That really, really works for me. I'm still not opposed to the spiritual boulders reading. I would be fine with that, but actually I kind of like this better because it seems to me to fit. The problem with the idea of him having sort of basically imposed two different shapes, like on the one hand we've got the horses and riders, and on the other hand we've got the boulders. If both of those are spiritual, if both of those are just kind of a sort of a spiritual power that is manifested upon the water, and but like in these two different ways, like why both? Why those things? Like why? Whereas it makes much more sense if we just see the one spiritual manifestation combined with the effect of the spiritual augmentation of the river. That all makes a lot of sense to me, right? And helps me understand that Gandalf's role and Elrond's role in the flood, but again, more importantly, a better understanding of Gandalf's power and what Tolkien conceives of Gandalf doing here at this point, and then even bigger picture, a better understanding of how magic works in Tolkien's world. Anyway, that's where I came to at the end of our boulder discussion, and those are pretty awesome things. That was, again, that meant a lot to me to sort of figure that out. So when I linger on a passage, which I've done and I'm gonna do again, right? I'm doing that because if I'm not satisfied, right? If I'm not satisfied that we have a reading that makes sense, I'm either gonna stay there until I figure it out, until we figure it out together, or I'm gonna come back to it again and again until we figure it out, right? Because again, like that's what I'm here for. And if sometimes I seem to take a really long time with that, I apologize. And this again is something I've said before, but this is really, I could wish that, every conclusion I drew, every reading I made of the text were something which just like immediately emerged and, you know, in like its luminous perfection as soon as I read the text. But, you know, that's not how it works for me. You know, sometimes it's funny, you know, when people talk about like my Hobbit book or something like that, or my podcast, you know, sometimes a word that people often use are like, oh, thank you for your insights on the text. And I'm like, well, I'm glad that you think that like what I said was insightful, but it always feels to me a little bit, like not quite the right word, right? It's not exactly like I have a flash of insight when I read the text. Occasionally it happens, and it's super awesome when it does happen. I'm real super grateful when it happens, but it's not my normal mode. My normal mode is plodding through and like looking at things from one angle and another angle until it finally makes sense, right? And sometimes I have to beat my head against it for a long time, or chew on it for a really long time, until I finally come to a place where I feel like, and then you know, I put it in my Hobbit book and it sounds like a luminous insight that I just came to, right? But that's not how it works behind the scenes. And in this program, right, you know, in this project that we're undertaking together, this is not me presenting polished materials. This is us working together behind the scenes, right? We're all behind the scenes here doing this. And by the way, this is something that I've mentioned this before. I'll mention it again. I do want to have a product from this. I would love to package together and put forth, and we're working on this. Actually, I might come to you guys with a proposal here about working on this a little bit more actively together. I would love to package it, and then we can package it up and make it all sound like we all had these beautiful insights as we read through casually, right? But that's not what this process is going to be. So sometimes if it's a little painful, it's okay. Just like go in, come back, or fast forward to the end of that episode. It's all good. I won't be offended. But this is, I hope, and thank you, Green Great Dragon, for saying that. I hope that you all find it rewarding in the end. And the other thing that I kind of, to myself, sort of justify all of this with, is that I am one of the I'm still a literature professor at the end of the day. You know, that's kind of still what my genes are. And one of the main things that I always tried to emphasize in class, right, when I'm teaching books, it's cheap ultimately to just like have your own insights of the text and like deliver them as from on high, right? And be like, come, let me cast light upon this text for you, my ignorant students, right? You can do that as a literature professor, and it's like, you know, whatever. There's some temptations to do that kind of thing. But that's never for me what I have been most satisfied in as a teacher. What I like to do is to like help to show and to model the way of doing this, right? So not to mystify, but to demystify the process of coming to these conclusions. So I hope you're able to follow along not only with my results, but with my process. And I'm going to have to ask for your indulgence, because I aim to indulge this process, because as I said, I'm never doing this again. I'm not going to live long enough to do this a second time. And not only am I really enjoying the process of doing that, but it's not just that I have a bunch of questions that I am determined to find answers to. I'm discovering questions, goodness knows, like I would never, ever have seen the boulders coming. Like there are things like our discussion of Weathertop, like that blew my mind, right? I mean, I learned stuff about the attack on Weathertop I never thought I was going to learn when we began that discussion. Here, I never even thought this was here, right? I mean, I never even would have imagined that discussing the rolling and grinding boulders would have led to anything, frankly, right? And here, you know, this really cool stuff has come from it. So I'm enjoying myself. I'm learning a lot, and I hope many of you are too. And if it seems to drag, it's okay. It's all right. I won't be offended if you have to go or take a nap or whatever. But This is what's happening. So Trish, exactly as you said before, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. Like this is what's going to happen, and this is going to keep happening. So just be warned. All right. Okay. Oh yeah, Tony, the reinterpretation of Goldberry. Yeah, that was one of my top moments too. Yes, Irindis's comment about the water lily still changed my view of Goldberry forever. Again, like I've learned so much from this discussion, and I'm not going to stop it. So, all right. With that in mind, let's keep going. And I'm not going to talk about the boulders anymore now. Yeah. So, let's. There will be some people are bringing up like things that we skipped or things that we missed, right? We are going to have to go back and cover some things, so we'll see, but that's later. I'm not gonna slow our already glacial pace through the text by taking whole classes and going back and covering things. Occasionally I'll go back in the question section at the beginning, but not every time, of course. And maybe we have to figure out a system for later on going back and addressing some of the things that we didn't achieve closure on or things that we skipped entirely. We'll see, right? We'll see what we can do later on. Anyhow, yeah. Oh, Ambrosius, really honest, we're working on something like that. We're working on that. Like I said, I want to, the time has come now that we're, way up in book 2 and of course over 100 episodes now. The time has come for us to begin compiling some things. That definitely should happen. And we're going to work on that. So, all right. With that in mind, let us rush forward to the text. Frodo just fell asleep and we're waking up, and it's now day 2 in Rivendell, or at least day 2 of Frodo's consciousness. Frodo was now safe in the last homely house east of the sea. That house was, as Bilbo had long ago reported, a perfect house, whether you liked food or sleep or storytelling or singing or just sitting and thinking best, or a pleasant mixture of them all. Merely to be there was a cure for weariness, fear, and sadness. As the evening drew on, Frodo woke up again, and he found that he no longer felt in need of rest or sleep, but had a mind for food and drink, and probably for singing and storytelling afterwards. He got out of bed and discovered that his arm was already nearly as useful again as it had ever been. He found laid ready clean garments of green cloth that fitted him excellently. Looking in a mirror, he was startled to see a much thinner reflection of himself than he remembered. It looked remarkably like the young nephew of Bilbo, who used to go tramping with his uncle in the Shire, but the eyes looked out at him thoughtfully. "Yes, you have seen a thing or two since you last peeped out of a looking-glass," he said to his reflection. "But now for a merry meeting." He stretched out his arms and whistled a tune. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Interesting, Mary says, when first reading this book, it was Rivendell I wanted to visit and still do. Yeah, I you've got to agree, right? I mean, Rivendell's got to be in one of the top 5 vacation spots, right? I mean, the way that Tolkien talks about Rivendell surely makes it sound like my ideal vacation, right? Where you go somewhere and the food is really good and it's really relaxing and there's like, fun things to do if you want them, but no pressure. And oh man, sounds awesome to me. Anyway, Fourth Thoughtless is asking, is there any other instance of Tolkien directly quoting from The Hobbit? Some of the characters will quote from it, but I don't recall the narrator quoting from it in any other place. That does make this a very interesting passage, quoting Bilbo's long ago report, right, of Rivendell. The fact that, and it's an interesting move to make because... I mean, we'd be thinking of it anyway, most likely, like, referring back to the short rest of Bilbo and the dwarves in The Hobbit. But by not only alluding to the parallel between Frodo stopping here now and Bilbo stopping there before, but actually quoting the text, right? He brings this episode, not just this chapter or this period of time in which the party is in Rivendell, but this moment, right? This particular sequence when Frodo is being reintroduced to everybody, right? It puts this section in touch with The Hobbit in a much more direct way than we've seen everywhere that I can think of, right? Yeah. So Crownless is asking who's the narrator here in the first sentence or two. I'm going to go with Frodo. I think this sounds like Frodo. Of course, either Frodo or Sam would quote Bilbo there, right? That's not surprising. But again, see, that's one of the things that makes it surprising. You'd think that there might be more connections. Tony, you're making me think here. So Tony says it's a bit of what we might call fan service, right? Yes. And it harkens back to when this was a Hobbit sequel. Yes, but now, Tony, I'm suddenly doubting. Can somebody go see if we can find it? Can somebody go to the Return of the Shadow and look it up? See if in the early drafts of the beginning of the many meetings materials, was this there then? I mean, was this there when it was actually a Hobbit sequel and Tolkien was still thinking of it that way? I wonder. I can't remember for sure if it was. It might be, but I'm not sure. It'd be interesting if it weren't, right? If this were something he added after it was already no longer just a Hobbit sequel, right? That would be especially fun, but I don't remember. Anyway, so... let's think more about the implications of that. Why? Well, not why. I have a sloppy habit of asking the question why. When I say, why does Tolkien connect us to The Hobbit here? It makes it sound like we're trying to put ourselves inside his head, right? And guess the reasons why he did things, which that's never what I mean when I ask that question. What I mean is, what is this has happened, right? What is the effect of this having happened, right? Since we have... been brought very directly into contact with the Hobbit here. What is the consequences of that? What is the effect of that on the story here? Merely to be there was a cure for weariness, fear, and sadness. One thing that's interesting is that when we recall the passages from the Hobbit, when we go back to the chapter of the Hobbit, again, as this passage is forcibly compelling us to do by quoting it, that chapter was called A Short Rest, right? And yes, Bilbo was refreshed, and they were, the whole party was sort of fortified by their time, not only by rest and food, but also by additional supplies and by advice and expert information, right? This is where the sort of full... the inscription, the reading of the moon letters, right, by Elrond is a really big deal because that the moon letters themselves contain like the core prophecy, which I say prophecy because it's not instructions, right? The prediction that the thrush will knock and that the last light of the setting sun on Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole. That's what's in the moon letters, right? And they learn that there. So we have rest, but also the the unfolding of I mean, it sounds super grandiose, right? Like the unfolding of their destiny. It's not like they were changed. Their quest didn't change. Like they were headed to the mountain. They were still headed to the mountain afterwards. They've not been redirected at Rivendell, but the whole trip, right? The whole quest was kind of, I don't know, sort of recontextualized. I think the moon letters are kind of a big deal. When they leave Bag End, they're headed for the mountain. They have a goal, but they don't have a plan. they don't have a plan, and they frankly don't have much reason to believe that they're going to succeed in what they're attempting to do, right? Or at least no rational person could look at them, the 14 of them, or 15 if you count Gandalf, at the end of chapter 1 of The Hobbit and say, oh yeah, this is going to pan out, right? I'm pretty sure they're going to be able to manage that. That's just not likely. Things change with the Moonletters, right? It's with the revelation of the Moonletters, not only the content of the Moonletters, but the coincidence of the revelation of the Moonletters, that Elrond happens to hold it up on the particular day when the moon is in on the date in which the moon is on the particular phase that it's in. Like, if it hadn't happened to be, on midsummer with a crescent moon when he held it up, then they wouldn't have been revealed, right? So again, there's a sense in which their whole quest is kind of touched by destiny at Rivendell. All of these things that I'm saying right now, this is me trying to answer the question, what did the visit to the House of Elrond, the visit to Rivendell, mean in The Hobbit? We're being we're being reminded of that, right? We're being asked to sort of set Frodo's visit to Rivendell here alongside Bilbo's visit, right? So I'm trying to think, what are the things that we might kind of be expecting, right? Yeah, Tony, see, exactly. Aragorn's broken primary weapon is still an upgrade from the no weapons at all that the dwarves brought on their quest, right? So there you go. Anyway, so those are the two things, I guess, big picture, I would point to when I look back at chapter 3 of The Hobbit. Both the sort of material reinforcement, that's not the right word, encouragement, they've been bolstered, right, by the rest, by the food, by the supplies, by the guidance, by the advice, but they've also been kind of touched by destiny there. Not quite for the first time, but in the first and most dramatic way, right? Okay, so with that in mind, we can kind of have that expectation, I think, to some extent. It seems to me fair to recall some of those things. We already know. We have good reasons to know that Frodo is going to be coming to a point of destiny here in Rivendell, right? From all the way back in Bag End, there was the question. He will bear the ring to Rivendell. That's the plan, right? His destination when he leaves the Shire is Rivendell. It's not a waypost, unlike Bilbo, right? Bilbo was headed to the mountain. Bilbo was headed to Bag End with the mountain on the way, and Rivendell was only a one-way stop along each direction of the trip, right? So, but for Frodo, Rivendell is his destination. But of course, it's going to be in Rivendell where the decision is going to be made, right? Where his ultimate sort of destiny is going to be determined. Is he going to bear the ring on further? Gandalf raised that prospect back in Bag End, but it was not settled. But that task may be for others, he admitted, right? Or perhaps attempted to comfort Frodo with the possibility of. But remember, of course, it was just coming up in their first conversation that we've been talking about for the last couple months, right? This prospect, this question of what is his relationship with the ring? Is he still going to be the ring bearer? What's going to happen? Remember Gandalf's sort of thoughts about what Frodo could become and what his destiny might be, right? It's a question that Gandalf is asking. What's going to come of Frodo? What's going to happen to Frodo? What is Frodo's destiny? Both in the sense of where's he headed? Right? Is this quest for him? Is he to be the ring bearer all the way to Mount Doom? Or also in another sense, like what's going to happen to him? Is he going to be okay? Is he going to fall into evil? Remember, those are the questions that Gandalf himself was asking when he was looking at Frodo carefully when in that last conversation. So, let's see. So in that way, I think we can kind of see a parallel, or again, we're sort of prepared for destiny to strike in some way. The destiny striking in The Hobbit is a little bit dramatic, but it's not sort of earth. It's not like this, right? It's not like a redirection of the entire journey here. Yeah, Tiber says he's trying to imagine Frodo giving the ring up if another bearer had been chosen. Yeah, that'd be tough, right? Maybe already impossible. I'm not sure, but it might be impossible. He could probably do it, probably. But he and the ring have already been through quite a bit, especially in the last month, right? So, yeah. I think... Yeah, I agree. Fourth Dauntless says he definitely need help, but there's help around. Yeah, exactly. I think that he could do it. But either way, it's going to rock his world, right? Whether he takes the ring on or whether he doesn't. Yeah, Aragorn, I agree. It would be parallel to the difficulty that Bilbo had. Bilbo had it for a lot longer, but the way in which the events of his journey have clearly had an impact. Remember, if our reading was correct last week, Gandalf was concerned about that, right? That's what Gandalf was, doing a double take for when he was looking at Frodo, was to try to see how firmly does the ring have its grip on him. He's noticed that the last few months since he last saw Frodo have already introduced a change in his relationship to the ring, and at least he fears that it might possibly even have done more, right? So Flammifer, that's why I would say it would be, I don't know that it'd be harder than for Bilbo, but I doubt it would be much less hard, because the ring is grabbing him harder. Remember, as Gandalf was suggesting, that the ring gets impatient, right? It wanted to leave Gollum. And you kind of have to think that it was pretty well done with Bilbo too. The ring seems to be, the temptations that Frodo has been experiencing with the ring have been regular and frequent during this journey. It gives the impression anyway that the ring is acting on him much more actively perhaps than it did with Bilbo. And you're right, Belanxmond, he has had the ring for 17 years. So it's not like, Bilbo had it for 60 years and Frodo's only had it for a month. It's a significant percentage of the amount of time that Bilbo had it. But again, I really think the last 6 months are more significant. Another reason, Flammifer, that I think shouldn't be overlooked, Frodo knows what it is, right? If Frodo claims it for himself, if Frodo thinks about his own keeping of the ring and ownership of the ring, his will is engaged with what it actually is, where it never was with Bilbo, right? He never knew. Flammifer, I do suspect that Sauron seeking it more actively and exerting his own will has an impact as well. That makes sense to me. I don't know. I mean, he's a long ways off, right? To what extent is his will operative on the ring itself? Gandalf's words suggest that it's possible, right? That it's possible that he is impacting it in some ways. Yeah, that seems possible. Anyway, Brunir, it's true that Bilbo had it for over 60 years, but again, the point is, Frodo has had it almost a third as long as Bilbo already, right? So again, it's not like he's only had it for 6 months and Bilbo had it for 60 years. The proportion is much, much closer to even than that. So yeah, no, I mean, it's been a long time. No, Scooter, I think Bilbo only had it the 60 years, right? He got it when he was 50, and he gave it up when he was 71. Because it's been almost 80 years since the Bilbo's journey, but Bilbo gave up the ring 17 years ago. Frodo's had it since then. So anyway, yeah. No, we don't know exactly how often Bilbo wore the ring. We do know that he used it, but again, especially in his later years when there was less call for it, we know that Gollum didn't use it very often. So there's reason to think that it's kind of tempting. You guys will remember, maybe you'll remember, that when Peter Jackson and company were doing the Gollum sequence, the Smeagol and Deagol sequence, and his, the sort of the backstory of Gollum sequence at the beginning of the Return of the King, that in their commentaries and stuff, they were talking about parallels to things like heroin addiction, right? And showing the sort of addictive spiral as Gollum goes down, and there are ways in which that's a really compelling parallel. And it is my suspicion, even before, I'm not saying influenced by that, I mean outside of that, it's my suspicion that many Tolkien readers kind of think of it in that way, as akin to a kind of addiction, right? Like maybe a drug addiction of some sort. But I think it's important to recall that there are many ways in which it's unlike that, right? Again, like one of the patterns of drug addiction is like more and more and more, right? Getting hooked and going back to it more and more until you're high most of the time, right? Or as often as you can be. And it's harder and harder. You go through harder and harder withdrawal, right? If you try to stop, if you try to not do it. That parallel would lead one to suggest that the relationship with the ring would mean like you'd have to have it, you'd have to wear it more and more often. It would demand to be worn more and more often, right? And you would have to go back to it and back to it until in the end, you were wearing it all the time and you were permanently invisible because you never took it off. But that's not the pattern that we see. That's not what happens to Gollum. We have no reason to think that's what happened to Bilbo either, right? Gollum used it less and less as time went on. So I'm not saying that the parallel totally doesn't work. I'm just saying it can be a little bit misleading, right? We have to be a little bit cautious with that parallel, I think. So yeah, Belongspawn said it's almost like a hoarding addiction. Yeah. That's interesting. Trifle says it's more seduction, less addiction. Perhaps in some ways. Yeah. Well, Scudo, I don't know, maybe. I mean, the fact is we don't know anything about the sequence of the Scudo's thinking about the that like the rings of power seem to operate on the 9 rings of power seem to operate on their human victims in that way of wearing them until they're permanently invisible. We don't know that, actually. We really don't. We know almost nothing about the progress of the destruction of the ring wraiths. That would be on my short list of stories I would like to hear, right? I really look forward when the Silmarillion film project gets around to the destruction of the Ulairi, right? Creation / destruction of the Ulairi. That'll be fun, right? And Maven's laughing. We already set it up, Maven, right? We're already thinking about it when we did our episode on Cuiviénen and the aftermath of Cuiviénen, and began to think about the sort of laying the foundation for the human societies out in the east of Middle Earth who are under Sauron's sway, right? We began to think about that, and anyway, I think it's going to be really interesting to think about that. Tony, I'd be interested. Maybe they will. I would love to see them do it. I hope they don't do it in a hokey way, of course, but I really hope they have an opportunity, the Amazon folks, if they want to do that. But anyway, I get too distracted going down that particular rabbit hole. But it's just to say, we don't really know. We don't have really the only evidence that we have of a person who is like coming under the sway of the Rings of Power, it's really just Bilbo and Gollum. Even Isildur is very dubious evidence, because Tolkien kind of changes the story about Isildur. We get very little about Isildur in the Lord of the Rings itself. We get a good deal more about Isildur in Unfinished Tales, but that seems to be revisionist, which is fine. Like, his idea about Isildur changed or developed, which is cool. Anyway, no, Flammifer the Ring does do something on Weathertop. Well, I don't know. I'm not gonna go back to Weathertop right now. Yeah. Anyhow, okay. Tracing back my train of thought here to Frodo and changing his destiny and whether or not he would give up the ring. That's where we got onto all this. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, of course, Cecilia points out Sam is a really interesting data point there, right? Sam feels reluctance to give up the ring, even though he's only had it for a very short amount of time, right? But you get the impression that the amount of hold that the ring already has on Sam is much greater than if somebody else had gotten the ring and had it for the number of hours that Sam had it, back 5 years before, right? That is to say, I do think that the effect of the ring on Sam, the increased effect of the ring on Sam, Cecilia, as you point out, does suggest to me evidence of how the ring is changing, right? We know the ring changes. We know that the effect of the ring changes, both with proximity to Mordor and with like the time as Sauron is putting forth his will more and more. So for that reason alone, I think we have lots of reasons to think that it would be harder for Frodo to give up the ring now than it would have been for Bilbo to give it up at year 17. I think we have pretty good reason to believe that. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so Tony, we're getting to Frodo looking at himself in the mirror because this is our first reunion, right? The first in the series of reintroductions that Frodo gets when Frodo, now post-wounding, right, post-experience on the other side, now comes back and is reintroduced into society, is reintroduced into his old world, right? Except it's not his old world. It's the last homely house. Now someone, and I've already forgotten who it was because it was ages ago. Okay. It was like 20 minutes ago, but still, I don't remember, pointed out the significant or the interest in calling it the last homely house east of the sea, which, and again, you can double check. Somebody can double check this for me. I don't think it calls it that in The Hobbit. I just call the last homely house. And in the Hobbit context, it's pretty clear that that means when you are headed east, right? When you're going from the Shire, we're going through, friendly lands to unfamiliar friendly lands to unfriendly lands to the wild, right? And the last homely house is on the border of the wild. When you leave Rivendell and head east, you are in the wild, capital T, capital W, in The Hobbit, right? So it is in that sense that it's the last homely house, or when you're coming back home, it's the first homely house, right? It is your retransitioning into society, into friendliness, right? Into the tame world versus the wild. And again, that in that much more kind of simple linear geography that we get in The Hobbit, right? That's the role of the last homely house. By adding east of the sea, that changes it, I think, very significantly. The last homely house east of the sea. Suggests to me, you know what that does to me? That completely changes the word last. Last was purely geographical, right? In The Hobbit. Like, as you're going east, it's you'll meet some homely houses along the way, right? This is the last one you're going to meet in this direction, right? Now, by calling it the last homely house east of the sea, last seems to now be referring not to geography, but to chronology, right? That is, in this age of the world, it is the last homely house. Homely in what sense? Again, in The Hobbit, homely in the sense of a house that is like home, that has at least all of the comforts of home, right? Which is homely instead of inhospitable and dangerous like the wild. Exactly. Aragorn, that's just how I read it. It's the last one left outside of Valinor, right? All the other homely places have been taken out of the world. East of the sea, so west of the sea, and down the Lost Road, there's still homely houses there, like on Tol Eressëa and in Valinor, right? But here, east of the sea, there's only one homely house left, and that is Rivendell. That is Elrond's house, right? Lothlorien is a baby brother. So what's Lothlorien? Chopped liver, right? Yeah, it's not a homely house. First of all, as Lincoln points out, it's not a house, right? And that seems perfectly fair to say. But I would say more there, because keep in mind, well, first of all, homely to whom? See, again, in The Hobbit, homely to Bilbo, right? Homely to people for whom the Shire is their model, right? Of what homeliness is. If last means last in that sense, the last surviving homely house in Middle-earth, the others all being west of the sea, right? That seems clearly to me to mean homely for elves, for the high elves especially. The last refuge for elves before they depart, right? I'm torn here. A couple things. I agree with a lot of you are talking about how Lothlorien is just different because it's not homely in that sense. It's like entering another world. It doesn't, as Fourth Dawn was just saying, homeliness implies welcome and comfort, which Lothlorien lacks. Mary was saying that it's, in Lothlorien, you don't so often have guests from the outside, right? So it's not homely in that sense. Yeah, I hear all those distinctions, but I'm not sure I'm satisfied by those. If it's the last homely house east of the sea, it has to be for elves, doesn't it? I mean, doesn't that make that name now suddenly rather elf-centric, right? I mean, when it comes to homely houses, east of the sea, we're talking about all of Middle-earth. Chronologically speaking, it's not the last surviving homely house in all of Middle-earth, full stop, right? I mean, Prancing Pony's pretty homely, right? Come on, Tom Bombadil's house is pretty homely. We've already hit a couple other homely houses, right? There's lots of homely houses in Middle-earth, broadly speaking, right? That welcome travelers and that are homely and everything else. So there's no sense in which this could be called the last homely house east of the sea in a mundane sense, right? I think it's but Luke, east of the sea, those others are west of Rivendell, sure, but it doesn't say it's the easternmost of the last homely houses. See, again, in The Hobbit, that's how it works, right? We are on the line, right? We're on the line between the Hobbit and the Lonely Mountain, right? And as you go east, it's the last homely house you come across. That's definitely the Hobbit sense of it. Here, adding east of the sea, to me, totally changes that, right? I can't read that as last homely house in that sense anymore, because now it's putting it in this larger context, right? East of the sea means Middle Earth, all of it, the whole thing, Middle Earth. So if it's the last homely house east of the sea, then it has to be meaning not to elves, not by elves for others. Because how does that make sense? I mean, I know it, in a sense, it would seem to fit Rivendell. I'm not denying that, but it's not like that's a thing, you know? Like, elves used to have homely houses all over the place, right? One of the things elves loved to do was, like, make welcoming houses for the other peoples, right? Elves used to be in the hospitality business, but, you know, now we're getting towards the end of the Third Age. There's only one of these elvish homely houses left, and that's Rivendell, right? That's not a thing. That doesn't make any sense at all, right? So, so the directional thing, the geographical thing, to be last in that sense, like this is the last this is the last exit, you know, before, you know, whatever, like that's, I can't see it in that. In The Hobbit, yes. Here, no, not anymore. So in what sense is it the last homely house east of the sea? Saying it's the last homely house east of the sea seems to me clearly to suggest that there are other homely houses west of the sea. Does that seem fair? That seems like a logical necessity, right? If there are other homely houses, if that model, right, is, you know, so that at least the narrator here, Frodo or whoever, is imagining that in Tolaresia there are other homely houses, that, like, the majority of surviving homely houses in Arda are west of the sea, right? And that what you get at Rivendell is a glimpse or foretaste of that which is those homely houses to the west of the sea. Then that suggests that the other two really elvish places in Middle-earth, namely Lothlorien and the Grey Havens, are not homely houses in that same sense, right? So the Grey Havens, that's easy to me, right? Because the Grey Havens, it's not a home at all. I mean, Círdan lives there. I'm not saying that there aren't any elves who have taken up more or less, at least what would look to mortals like quite permanent residence at the Grey Havens, but it's not a homely house, right? It's a harbor, right? It's designed to be a harbor, right? So it is it's not a homely house, right? It's got a totally different function. So what about Lothlorien again? Why isn't Lothlorien a homely house east of the sea? And although it's not a house, I'm not sure getting it off on a technicality satisfies me completely. See, Lilith, I don't think that homely in this sense, again, if we're saying that there are homely houses west of the sea, then I don't think it could be a term referencing their willingness to welcome outsiders, because there's almost no examples of those homely houses west of the sea welcoming outsiders. It doesn't happen. Well, it will happen eventually, right? But there have been almost no documented cases of it beforehand. I say almost none. There is one really important one, right? And that is Ariel, right? Alfwine, the Book of Lost Tales. Book of Lost Tales exists in a kind of parallel world to the Lord of the Rings to some extent, but we know that there are some concepts that Tolkien never left behind entirely. We do know that in Tolkien's imagination, let me say this a different way. Tolkien imagined what Tolaresia is like in detail exactly once, right? There is only one time he ever wrote blocks of prose describing people walking around in Tolaresia, interacting with other people, doing stuff, living in Tolaresia, right? There's one time he did that, and that was in the Book of Lost Tales. And you know what? It was a pretty homely house, right? It was very like Rivendell in a lot of ways, actually. It's not hard to look back and say that the house into which Ariel enters in the Book of Lost Tales is almost like a precursor of Rivendell itself. Okay, so because here's the thing. I mean, a lot of you guys are focused on accepting outsiders and stuff, but I'm not convinced that that's the crucial factor here. And here's why I'm not convinced of that. Again, in The Hobbit, that's true. But adding East of the Sea totally changes the concept in my mind. Totally changes it. Not only does it change to me completely the meaning of the word last, right? No longer last geographically, but last chronologically. The last survivor of the last homely house still to survive east of the sea is now how I read the word last there. Now that we're talking about all of Middle-earth. But to me, it also suggests that we need to change the word homely as well. Because again, if there are homely houses west of the sea, there are not homely houses in that sense. We can define homely house in The Hobbit as a house that is comforting and welcoming to visitors, right? When Bilbo visits Rivendell, right? When he has his short rest, as we discussed, a big part of what's happening there is he is being welcomed, right? He finds the house homely. That doesn't seem to me make any sense anymore in the new context that East of the Sea places it in. The homely houses west of the sea are not for wayfarers of other races. That's not a concept, right? So if we draw the conclusion, which I have a hard time avoiding, that if it's the last one east of the sea, there's got to be some west of the sea, then there has to be a different concept. Homely, I think, now we have to think about what that word means in the new context. And I think homely now begins to be connected in my mind to elven home, right? Rivendell, perhaps, is now the last homely house. If it's the last chronologically, right? Yes, Luke, in The Hobbit, homely means hobbit friendly. Not only am I not convinced it means that here, I am convinced that it means the opposite of that. Not quite the opposite of that, but something quite different from that. If it's the last one left east of the sea, all of the other homely houses are west of the sea. Home in the sense of being the home to the elves, right? That's where the elves' home is. And they're all leaving to go there, such that most of them have left now. And there is only one homely house remaining east of the sea. And indeed, in Rivendell, we find more of the High Elves remain there than anywhere else in Middle-earth, right? Exactly, Tony. So the other homely houses are awaiting them when they get back to the Undying Lands. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And, Trifle, if you want to argue that it's not the last to the elves, but the last to the Noldor, I'd be willing to hear that argument. Certainly, we can see that apart from Galadriel, this is where we see most of the Noldor, right? So I can get behind that, but I want to think a little bit more broadly, right? Let's imagine it as homely in that sense. Like this is the last place in Middle Earth where you can find a life, a house, right? A place that is like Elvenhome, that is like the Blessed Realm, right? The little piece of the Blessed Realm on Earth. So people were asking, did there used to be other homely houses? Yeah, in this sense, sure. You know, it was the number one homely house in this sense? If we're defining homely house as like the home of the elves, like Elvenhome, but in Middle-earth, Gondolin. Gondolin is the homeliest house of all time. Exactly. Fourth Dalls was thinking the same thing. Gondolin is remember, that's what Turgon did, right? Turgon set up to make something as much like Valinor's. Remember, he even made like faux trees, right? The tree of golden sin, not exactly faux, as if he was trying to pass them off as knockoffs, but yeah, I mean, actively recalling, right? Tony, yes, Galandar, I also suspect that Linden, like when Gil-galad's, center of power was also a homely house in this sense in the old days, right? Mornawan Tyrion upon Tuna would be one of those homely houses west of the sea, right? Okay, so if we think about homely in this new sense, again, east of the sea is for me recontextualizing the entire phrase, last homely house, right? If we think about this in this new sense, then to me it begins to make more and more sense why this, in what sense this could be the last and Lothlorien doesn't count, right? Lothlorien is, it's neither homely nor a house, right? Lothlorien is something different. Galadriel, so if you think about it, you think about like what has Elrond built with the power of his ring and what has Galadriel built with the power of her ring, right? And there are some interesting differences here. Galadriel, this is going to be a crude way of describing it. But Rivendell looks to the west, whereas Lothlorien looks to itself, right? That is, so you've got Rivendell is thinking about Valinor. Lothlorien is, so one is looking back, Lothlorien is looking forward, right? Lothlorien is attempt to build a new kingdom of elves, not without memory of the olden days, right? But a new kingdom of Middle-earth, in Middle-earth. Even the fact that she's the only Noldo in the place, right? That it's all mostly Sylvan elves who are there, is itself kind of suggestive. Like, this is a kingdom of Middle-earth, right? For those who decided to stay here, right? This is not a place for the exiles. This is not a place of the people who have come back from Valinor. They all hang out in Rivendell because Rivendell is homely to them, right? Rivendell is like Gondolin. It is insular, Mary. That's certainly true, as was Gondolin, right? Yeah. Trifle says that he would argue that Galadriel does exactly what Anantar suggests doing with the rings, build a rival to Valinor. Yeah, something like that. No, forward-looking is not the right thing, Fourth Dallas. You're right. I mean, it's a very clumsy way to say it. But do you see the distinction I'm trying to make, though? It's not about forward versus backwards exactly. It's, but Rivendell seems to be focused on its connection to the West in ways that Lothlorien is not, right? It's interested in itself. It's focused on what is built there, right? So I only mean forward-looking in the sense of building something which will continue the Elder Days here in Middle-earth, moving into the future. Whereas Rivendell is really looking backwards more. But yeah, I think Forthal, as you were agreeing with me before, Lothlorien is a place of Middle-earth preserved as if it had been untouched by time or the stain of corruption. Yeah, exactly. Lothlorien is Middle-earth as it could have been, right? That's not Rivendell. Rivendell is looking back to Elvenhome, right? Homely, in that sense. Homely for the elves, in that it is like Valinor. It is like Elvenhome. It's not either one, right? But it is like, for elves who are, as yet dwelling here in Middle-earth, it is homely to them, especially exiles, especially those, the Noldor who were in Valinor. It'll remind them of Elvenhome. It'll remind them of the Blessed Realm. Yeah. So that's the sense I would give to the word homely, and that's why it would make sense to me that Rivendell could be, in this new sense, the last homely house east of the sea, and Lothlorien isn't that. It's not that it's lesser. It's just that it's different. It's trying to be something different. Yeah. And the havens. Yeah. The havens, Lilith, are not trying to be a home at all. Again, it's not that nobody lives there. But even Círdan himself, who's been there for quite some time, is transient, JJ. That's exactly it. It's not... I doubt he even thinks of it as his home, right? Círdan probably thinks of himself as camping there, right? Until the day comes when his job is done, right? The havens are a truck stop. Exactly, Mike. That's it. And you might, like the person who runs the diner at the truck stop, right? They're going to be there for a while, but it's not like it's home. Exactly, right? Crownless, yeah, the concept of tarrying is really central. I think that seems to me right. Yeah, so the havens are not a homely house either. Again, like Lothlorien, they're neither homely nor a house, right? So yeah, I think that makes sense. So Flammifer, the havens are at the center, maybe at the center geographically of Gil-galad's last kingdom, but I think it's pretty clear. The passing of the ring from Gil-galad to Elrond seems to me to indicate fairly clearly that if there is left in Middle-earth a center of Gil-galad, if something remains of the kingdom of Gil-galad in Middle-earth, it's in Rivendell, right? It's not at the havens. So the havens might be geographically closer to where Gil-galad used to hang out, right? But I don't think that the heart of Gil-galad's realm of old is there still. The heart of Gil-galad's realm of old, that of it which survives into the Third Age of Middle-earth, is in Rivendell. I think, Elrond is his heir in that sense. Yeah. So Lilith asks, why does Frodo use this term for Rivendell if it's a place that the elves would only feel, that the elves only would feel as the last homely house? Well, here's a thought, Lilith. Remember that this whole paragraph is bringing us into contact with the Hobbit, right? And he begins by recalling the name for Rivendell that was given, the name for the House of Elrond that was given in The Hobbit, the last homely house, right? And then what does he do? He transforms it, right? He transforms it. And yes, JJ, Elrond was Gil-galad's number one guy. Elrond was Gil-galad's right-hand dude for a long time. Elrond lived with him in Lindon for thousands of years. Yeah, he was his herald. Exactly. Yeah, Elrond was totally Gil-galad's right-hand guy. Anyhow, so, okay. Frodo. So why would Frodo do this? Remember that we're told in the prologue, which we didn't discuss yet, that Frodo and Sam were both reluctant to change anything that Bilbo actually wrote, right? When in The Hobbit. But although Frodo might be loath to change anything with his own hand that Bilbo wrote in his memoirs, right? I don't think that Frodo is at all against recontextualizing, right? You see what I mean? Frodo, when he comes to write The Lord of the Rings, right, now has a totally different perspective on Rivendell than Bilbo did when he wrote The Hobbit, right? It was the place that it was Bilbo's favorite rest area on the way to and from the Lonely Mountain, right? And so he thought of it as the last homely house or the first homely house when you're going back in the other direction, right? And when he called it the last homely house, he had, this one relatively narrow, comparatively inexperienced, right? I mean, he gave it that name apparently like when he was very inexperienced, right? In his first month of adventure, right? So, Frodo is looking back on the name that Bilbo gave to Rivendell. And Frodo, the elf friend, now with his much broader experience of Middle-earth and of the elves and everything else, right, now perceives something. He perceives, this is the last homely house, but not only in the very limited sense in which Bilbo described that in The Hobbit, right? It is the last homely house, but in a very different sense. So he repeats the name, right? Deliberately connecting back to what Bilbo said, but then recontextualizing it. The last homely house east of the sea, which completely transforms the sense of the name. Both of those words. Maybe the third too. I think it might transform what it means by house too, but we don't have to go there necessarily. We already talked about that to some extent when we talked about Glorfindel, when this came up with Glorfindel. So it makes a lot of sense to me that Frodo would do that, both to make the connection and also to recontextualize it, right? To broaden the sense of that. And having done that, right? Having repeated but transformed, really, Bilbo's title, Bilbo's description of Rivendell, he then goes on to quote Bilbo's description, right? Bilbo might not have understood yet. He certainly does now, right? But he did not at the time he wrote his memoirs. He did not at the time understand the full significance of Rivendell, what Rivendell really meant to the elves and to Middle-earth, right? He didn't get that. He just thought it was Arden Crayon, exactly as you say, the last TripAdvisor 5-star hotel on his journey, right? That he was going to find. Yes, that's how Bilbo saw it before. So Bilbo didn't see that, but Frodo immediately assures us that does not change the fact that Bilbo's insight into Rivendell was also still true. It may be the last homely house east of the sea in a much more significant sense, in a much broader, more important sense than Bilbo saw. But it is still also a perfect house, whether you like food or sleep or storytelling or singing or just sitting and thinking best or a pleasant mixture of them all, right? Those things are still true. So for Frodo, particularly, remember, this is recovering Frodo. This is Frodo now returning to consciousness and health for the first time, second time to consciousness, right? First time to health, and that he's now going to get out of bed. Rivendell still retains part. It still retains all of the significance that it had for Bilbo. It's going to have more, too, right? Now he understands it more. The refreshment, the rest that he's able to get at Rivendell means much more to Frodo than it did to Bilbo. Bilbo was, tuckered out by the time he got to Rivendell on his trip, right? He was not chased across the ford by ringwraiths, right? He was not grievously wounded at peril of body and soul, right, on the way to Rivendell. Bilbo's refreshment that he received from his short rest was of a very limited kind. But Frodo needs that, right? His need for it is greater, but the thing that he needs from it is the same thing that he needed. So Elrond's house is still homely in Bilbo's sense. And Frodo immediately goes on to emphasize that, right? Even after he has drawn our attention to the fact that it is the last homely house in multiple senses. And so therefore we're now wandering off into Rivendell in the story for the first time. All we've seen is the inside of Frodo's guest room, right? And the beams on the ceiling, right? And a brief glimpse of what's out the window and Gandalf's chair. Now he's going to go out into Rivendell. Now we're going to meet Rivendell for the first time. And as we do, we get these two things, right? We get this reminder of its significance on a very material level, right? The perfection of this house as a place to rest and recover. And Frodo really needs that. But of course, we also have this very brief but very intriguing allusion to the broader significance of it, which we've already had hinted, right? Glorfindel's presence and his relationship with the House of Elrond has already suggested to us that Rivendell's kind of a big deal from an Elvish perspective, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, good. Let's see. Good. Tony is recalling what the narrator said when they wake up from the barrow. People that, after being long ill and bedridden, wake one day to find that they are unexpectedly well and the day is again full of promise. Yeah, a good passage for us to remember, as that does seem to be something like Frodo's experience here. Okay, so... All right, Cecilia, I will allow a question about the word house, since we might as well. Just asking a really good question. Is Rivendell... Are we supposed to be imagining that Rivendell is one house? Or, is it one big house, or are there many smaller houses around Rivendell? I have no doubt that Tolkien seems to have imagined it as one primary house. That's what he painted when he painted the picture of Rivendell. But I do think that it does not seem to me to be impossible that there are other houses too. And now I'm questioning my memory. Somebody look it up. Google it if you don't have it with you. Somebody find me the painting. His painting of Rivendell. Are there other roofs? I know you get the one homely house very clearly, right? But are there other smaller houses that he actually depicts in his painting? Ambrosius Aurelianus is thinking, house in the sense of estate, possibly. It also almost has to mean house in the other sense. Okay, that's the Rivendell picture I was thinking of. Ambrosius Aurelianus, thank you for that. And that is, so hang on, let me bring this over to the main screen for a second. It's small, but there it is. There's the last homely house. And we don't see any other buildings in this picture. That doesn't mean it's inappropriate to think of that being true, or that it's impossible. It just means he's only emphasized the one house. So it seems at least possible, if not likely, that Tolkien himself imagined it as one house, one building. But again, I don't think separate buildings are precluded from that description, even based upon his painting. Lilith, I agree. There's a lot of forest around the house there in that painting, and it's certainly possible for other smaller houses to be in the woods there. Absolutely. Yeah. So, but it is certainly a very big house. Yeah, very big house. Sure, absolutely. The extent to which it means house in the like genealogical sense, as when Gildor says, "I am of the house of Finrod," that's a little bit less clear. In what sense could a house be homely? Like a house of that kind be homely? I'm not really sure. And anyway, Elrond, he's got a great pedigree, but he doesn't have a house in that sense. I mean, he's got kids, he's got family, but is there a house in that ancestral sense? Is there a house of Elrond? I mean, kind of, I guess. Why am I resistant to that? I'm resistant to that because the role that Elrond plays in the Silmarillion, and I don't just mean in the published Silmarillion, like all the way through the Silmarillion tradition, like Elrond's number one job as a creation in Tolkien's stories at all was an endpoint. He was, this is why I saw you guys talking earlier, Maven and others were talking about his parent, you know, his identity, right? Is he Noldo? Is he whatever? And Maven was saying, yeah, he's kind of a Heinz 57 elf. Yeah, no, absolutely. But again, that's his job. In the Silmarillion, that's his job. He is related to everybody, like almost every major lineage in the Silmarillion. Like Elrond is its fruit. Elrond is designed to be like the spot where all of the family trees come together. He is in his own person, like the survival of like the entire First Age. He is the legacy of the First Age. That is like his role, clearly, repeatedly, his role in the Silmarillion tradition, right? From his earliest appearance in the Silmarillion tradition all the way to the end, he is so when you talk about a house, you know, like a house like the House of Elrond, you think of it as like from the progenitor, right? So just as when the Noldor came, you have like they divided and established their own kingdoms. So you have the House of Finrod, right? By which he really meant Fingon, but whatever, because Tolkien hadn't changed that name yet. But you have a House of Finrod, right? Because Finrod established a kingdom. But Elrond, again, he's the bottom of the tree. He's not the top of the tree. Yeah, Tony, you're right. Elrond and Elros both end up, of course, Elrond came first, and Elros, Tolkien clones Elrond later on and gives him a twin, so that he can do both things. both be the elf, the quintessential elf of the First Age, while also being the king of Numenor. But anyway, okay, all right. So, yes, Elrond and Elros both end up in that position, and as you say, Tony, it's a big deal when those lines are reunited in Aragorn and Arwen, right? So Aragorn and Arwen then become themselves, at the end of the Third Age, the same thing that Elrond was at the end of the First Age, that Elrond and Elros arguably were, so that the line of Elessar, right, the line of the kings of Gondor that are to come from Arwen and Aragorn, embody everything of the Elder Days, right? All of the elf realms, Melian, all of the Edain, all of, and then like all of the Second and Third Age stuff, right? The Dunedain and everything, right? It all comes through in the line of Elessar there in Gondor. So I agree that works that way. So yes, JJ, there definitely is a house of Elessar, right? Aragorn is in that role of establishing a house, but Elrond, that's why I feel uncomfortable talking about it as a house in that sense. Yes, you're right. For Thallus, of course, it's going to be the house of Tel Contar, not the house of Elessar. But still, anyway, yeah. Okay, that's enough contemplation of house. Let's see if we can complete the first sentence of the first paragraph of the first slide, shall we? Okay. Merely to be there was a cure for weariness, fear, and sadness. So, again, emphasizing, bring back to Frodo, right? Emphasizing the importance of the homeliness of the house in the mundane sense, right? The importance of that to Frodo. As the evening drew on, Frodo woke up again, and he found that he no longer felt in need of rest or sleep, but had a mind for food and drink, and probably for singing and storytelling afterwards. So he kind of recalls back through that catalog and says, you know what? Okay. I've had enough of the sleep, right? Time for some more of the active pleasures of Rivendell. What do we learn about him? These whole next two paragraphs are about Frodo rediscovering himself, right? He wakes up and find not only that he's okay, but that he's happy. He has a mind for food and drink and for singing and storytelling afterwards. It's a good place to be, and he's in a good place to be in that place, right? He discovered that his arm was nearly as useful again as it had ever been. I love the humility implicit in that final clause, right? It was never very useful to begin with, but in as much as it has ever been useful, it is almost that useful again, right? It's a very, very humble statement, and it makes me smile every time I read that. Nearly as useful as it ever had been. His discovery of his own arm, as if he's being reintroduced to his own arm. But I don't think he shakes his own hand. But again, discovered that his arm was nearly as useful again as it had ever been. Meeting his arm here, right, for the first time. He gets new clothes, clean garments of green cloth that fitted him excellently. Remember, hobbits really like the color green. We're told that in the prologue. We're told that back in The Hobbit, aren't we? Green and yellow. Isn't that a chapter 1 of The Hobbit thing that gets in there, as I recall? Certainly I know it's in the prologue. Is that in The Hobbit? I'm forgetting now. Y'all can tell me. Okay. Yeah. Green and yellow. Right. But is it in The Hobbit, or is it just, it's in Concerning Hobbits? I was pretty sure it was in there. couldn't remember if it was a parenthetical that got thrown in one of those in the first chapter of The Hobbit. But anyway, like the hair on their heads, parentheses, which was curly, right? One of those parentheticals there. But anyway, okay. Clean garments that fit him excellently and that are a color which is a favorite color of hobbits. Aha! JJ, it is in The Hobbit. I was right. They're inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress in bright colors, chiefly green and yellow, in parentheses, just like I said. Phew. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Very good. Okay. So new clothes seems to me to be an important thing in some sense, right? We had already the hobbits losing their clothes and running naked in the grass after the Barrow incident, right? And having to wear some of their warmer, their things that their warm weather gear that they brought against warmer weather, right? Because they lost, their old clothes. Remember, we talked about Sam's question about what became of their clothes and speculating about that. But being given new clothes is on the one. First of all, keep in mind, new clothes are kind of a big deal. New clothes that fit excellently are a really big deal. Clothing is one of the top 5 things that people in a post-industrial world have a hard time projecting themselves back into a pre-industrial mindset about, right? We mentioned one of them, another one of them last time. Horses are another one, right? It's hard for us to recreate how people looked at horses back in the pre-industrial world. But clothes are definitely another one of those things which just had so much of a different significance in a pre-industrial world. Just picking up clothes off a rack, right, is so, clothing is very, very, Scudo and Flamifer, absolutely right. Clothing is expensive. It is difficult to make. Not only is it, you gotta stitch it all by hand and everything, cut and stitch it all by hand. But the materials, right? And getting all of the different materials, it is tough. New clothing. Torloniel says she was reading the Nibelungenlied and it's like 75% of it is about clothes. Totally happens. Exactly. You would, to get, those of you who are, fans of 19th century British literature will also remember getting a new suit of clothes was often like an annual treat for servants on Lady Day. That's a big deal. If you're given a new dress, oh my goodness, a new dress. That's something you might only get once every few years. So new, excellent fitting clothes are a really big deal. This is a very generous gift. So this is not just like, and they did the common courtesy of like putting out some clothes for him to put on, right? This is a big deal. Yes, Tawith, Bilbo had whole rooms devoted to clothes. Exactly. Which means wealthy, right? That is a wealth marker. Now, keep in mind, Tolkien was being much less deliberate in his world building in The Hobbit, right? So, Bilbo also had a clock on his mantelpiece, right? Let's not forget that. So, Tolkien spent much less time when writing The Hobbit thinking about like what was life in this pre-industrial society like, right? We always have to keep that in mind. But anyway, yeah, exactly, Ambrosius. Arthur. I do sometimes stutter over your name. they would reuse cloth until it was literally falling apart, at which point they would mash it and turn it into paper. Yep, exactly. That's just how things worked. So anyhow, this is a generous gift. This is a kind and thoughtful gift. And it's significant. You know, he is an elf friend, and he is now dressed in the garments made for him by the elves. It's going to be kind of significant when they get their Lothlorien cloaks later on, right? Significant, I think, in a different way. But the mere fact that Frodo is now walking around in a brand new suit of clothes made for him by elves in Rivendell, there's a little bit of an element of, like, at least a sort of shade, right, of a new life for Frodo here. Again, waking up in this moment after his experience, coming back from being so close to death and now beginning life again, reintroducing himself to his own limbs and being like, hey, look at that. My arm works almost as well as it used to do. You know, he's rediscovering his own body, and he's now going to reintroduce himself to himself, right, as he looks himself in the mirror. He is startled to see a much thinner reflection of himself. It looked like the young nephew of Bilbo who used to go tramping with his uncle in the Shire. But the eyes looked out at him thoughtfully. He sees himself as he looks younger. He looks like his young self. He no longer looks portly and middle-aged, right? He looks more like he remembers looking when he was young. So he's lost weight, right? He's thinner and fitter. Remember, of course, the comment in the Midgewater Marshes about this, right? When he was told he was looking twice the Hobbit that he used to, and Frodo joked, you know, that there was that was surprising because there was a good deal less of him, right? And of course you'll remember that ended with the joke about him turning into a wraith, which I doubt he's going to joke anymore about, right? Because he did almost turn into a wraith. So the thinning process has not gone on indefinitely, but it has reached a remarkable point. And when it reaches this point, he's healthier, he's fitter, but he also looks both younger and older than the last time he saw himself, right? Frodo sees himself in a mirror, and he is shocked at what he sees. On the one hand, he looks younger. He reminds himself of his younger self, following Bilbo around, tramping with his uncle in the Shire, like the good old days when Bilbo was still there, right? But his eyes have changed. His eyes look out at him thoughtfully. Just as his body is different than it was when last he saw himself, his eyes are different from when last he saw himself. He has seen a lot. I think back of the eyes line in Bilbo's the poem that Bilbo makes, Bilbo's first real poem, when you know, the which is of course the road goes ever ever on at the end of The Hobbit. Eyes which fire and sword have seen, and horror in the halls of stone, look again. Oh shoot, how's that line end? Look again on and fields and trees they once have known. Meadows green, thank you. Look again on meadows green and trees and fields they once have known. Yes. Bilbo describing what his eyes have seen, right? How much his eyes have seen. Not just more countryside than he was used to seeing, right? But he's seen significant things. He's been changed. His eyes are now going to be looking out at the old familiar things again. After having seen what they've seen, what's going to happen? I've always said that I think that there's an implicit, almost an anxiety in that stanza of that poem when Bilbo sings it in The Hobbit. What's it going to be like? Can I go back again? I'm almost back again, right? Are the trees and fields, is it going to look the same, right? Frodo seeing his eyes staring at him out of the mirror, his thoughtful eyes, I think we can see a similar I think that we can see a similar not anxiety here in this case, but an acknowledgement. A similar kind of acknowledgement, an acknowledgement that he himself has been changed, has been altered in some sense by his experiences. Yeah, he does see, I think, looking at him thoughtfully, his eyes are showing more wisdom than they have. They have certainly experienced more, right? And he's survived it. And he has gained some wisdom. Yeah. And he speaks to them, his eyes. Yes, you have seen a thing or two since you last peeped out of a looking glass, he said to his reflection. But now for a merry meeting. So, do we get a mirror scene in Bag and Trifle? I'm not remembering for sure. I know we get a reference to a mirror, of course, the convex mirror that we discussed at some length before. I still love Lee's reading of that. But anyway, he's when he thinks he's looking rather flabby. Yeah, right. Okay, I remember that now. Yes. Good. You have seen a thing or two since you last peeped out of a looking glass, he said to his reflection. So for Thoughtless, he is addressing his reflection. But it seems to be the eyes that he's talking to. I mean, it's the eyes that peep out of a reflection, right? Or out of a looking glass, rather. It's the eyes that are doing the peeping. He uses lighthearted language, right? But here's the other thing I can't help but remember. Frodo, I don't want to go too far with this because this could get really cheesy and sort of English teachery pretty quickly. Sorry, I shouldn't insult English teachers, of which I am one, with that phrase. What I mean by that, I think when I call something English teachery, I am kind of casting back to my early days in English classes when I used to get really annoyed at what I felt to be like forced examples of symbolism in works of literature. And I always found that I loved books and I loved reading and I loved talking about books, but I really disliked English class because it seemed like really contrived and forced, like, and this is a symbol of that. And I'm like, oh, okay, what does that have to do with the story? I'm not saying that I necessarily, in retrospect, think they were all wrong about that, but I definitely wasn't getting it. I was not seeing it at the time. And so still, like, to be like, and this is like a symbol of that is what I still think of that as like English teachery. But anyway, yeah, fortunately, Trifle, that was even before I'd been exposed to anything like psychoanalytical symbolic interpretation. But anyway, let me, oh, interesting. Arthur says that phenomenon contributed to his majoring in history instead of English, despite his passion for literature. Yeah, no, still benefits to that. I agree. Anyway, let me go on and say the thing that I've been contextualizing here. Yes, Frodo is reflecting on his experience and how they've changed him. Here's the other thing. The image that he's talking to. So there's two Frodos here in the room, right? There's Frodo, the physical Frodo, and then there's the thing which is merely the image of Frodo that he's facing. I can't help but think of the other side. and the Wraith World discussion. Again, we should stop using the phrase Wraith World because we've certainly shown that it's not about the Wraiths don't own that place. They only are hijacking it in some ways. But this idea of the image of Frodo, Luke, the Looking Glass Frodo. I think, Luke, that's the link that's also leading me in this direction. Luke, of course, is thinking about Alice Through the Looking Glass, the famous Lewis Carroll book, which Tolkien loved. Lewis and Tolkien both absolutely adore Alice Through the Looking Glass, and referred to it many, many times. We're talking, if I remember correctly, Tolkien translated The Walrus and the Carpenter into Quenya. So anyway, and Alice through the Looking Glass, like the Looking Glass person, it's a different world, right? There is this like alternative world on the other side of the Looking Glass, so when I see Frodo at a Looking Glass, speaking to the Looking Glass Frodo as if it were a separate person who, like, the two of them are in this together, right? And this coming right after the traumatic experience, Frodo having just awoken from his traumatic experience in which, like, he was in the two worlds and being dragged across from the one world into the other, just like Alice, of course, travels into Looking Glass world, right? And has a sort of a hard time getting back to her regular world. Anyway, doing Alice in Mythgard Academy is a good idea, Tony. We should absolutely do Through the Looking Glass, especially through the Looking Glass in Mythgard Academy someday. Anyway, so anyhow, I don't want to make too much of it, but it's, and especially then here's the other thing, right? I remember that he's almost alluding to the fat joke that he made before about the thinning process going on indefinitely until he becomes a wraith, right? So all of those things together, his recollection of the fat joke, which involved him turning into a wraith, which then of course became almost horribly literally true when he was like himself in our world and in that other world on the other side. And now, like, him reflecting back on that and seeing that he is in fact, twice the Hobbit, and the thinning process has gone on, and it has affected him. He hasn't become a wraith, but his eyes are wiser because of his encounter with that other world. And then again, you add the Looking Glass stuff on top, and I can't help but sort of link all these things together. What do I do with that? Does that help at all? I don't know, but it's interesting. Him addressing his reflection in the second person is kind of interesting, right? This sort of sense of distance that Frodo has attained from himself during this whole process, right? I don't think that he's splitting himself. I certainly don't think that this is like meant to suggest covertly that, Frodo is really like partially still in the spirit world and whatever, like that. No, I'm not saying that. Well, I think this is as far as I would go. As we've said, Frodo's broken, right? Frodo has received a wound from which he's never going to recover. And one of the things, never going to recover in Middle-earth anyway. And one of the things that we see there, it's not a Smeagol Gollum thing happening just yet, but actually, JJ, and Christy, that's a really good parallel, right? He's not Gollum yet, but both of them have been damaged in a similar way, right? Both of them have been spread between the two sides, right? The regular world and this other spiritual world. And neither of them are whole. Both of them need healing, Gollum and Frodo, both need healing, right? Frodo at least is going to get it. And remember, we talked about how this new understanding of the other side that we came to really helps to understand why his going to the Blessed Realm in the end is the natural. It's not just that they're, have higher level healers there, but that retiring there and going to live there instead of the sort of warped fake version that he got, twisted version, that he got through his wound and also to some extent through the ring, right? Has had the damage that did. But the damage that is done to Frodo, the damage that was clearly done to Gollum, is to split them, right? They are divided. They are divided between the two worlds. They now have, like the Wraiths, they have a stake in both worlds, right? Part of them is in both worlds. And with Frodo, that's clearly true. He's still linked. His wound has been healed, right? But its marks are still on him, as the ring itself and the power of the ring. So again, him talking to himself in the mirror, him addressing his reflection as you, is a very gentle anticipation of that, right? And it's miles away from the way that Gollum talks to himself. It's miles away, but it's on the same path, right? And I think that it's kind of interesting to see those things kind of connected together. The kind of split that we see in Frodo and his reflection, and him reintroducing himself, him seeing himself anew. He has been in part rejuvenated, right? His physical part has been rejuvenated, but his spiritual part has been aged, has been damaged, has been healed, and increased in wisdom as well as a consequence, right? But he's been split. He's been his butter is being spread, right? Spread thin. So yeah, anyway, that's that seems to me to be in some sense foreshadowed by his talking to his reflection here, and by this, it's a significant thing that we get here. On the one hand, it's like a check-in with Frodo, right? By showing us this, Tolkien is able to demonstrate to us, like, okay, where is Frodo? How is Frodo different now, right? And we get that. Yeah, Tony says it makes Frodo's line to Sam about how Sam is meant to be whole, right? Yeah, absolutely. It is much more poignant when you think about it that way. He can't be whole, not in Middle Earth anyway. Yeah. Anyway, so in showing us where Frodo is, we're seeing lots of positives, right? And again, I don't think talking to yourself in the mirror is any sure indication that you're, on this road of, which is a lack of spiritual healing and all that. But I do think that it's a foreshadowing, that it's a hint of what is to come. What's his response? He stretches out his, now for a merry meeting, he says. He stretched out his arms and whistled a tune. He is anticipating that a merry meeting is going to happen, but what I also hear there, he is deciding that a merry meeting is going to. Now for a merry meeting. It is time for a merry meeting. He's going to be merry. He's made up his mind about that, right? And that I think is important. His will is not yet broken. His will is still set on merriment and whistling a tune. I'm not sure why he stretches out his arms. I'm not sure about that. Sideways? Like this? Presumably not like this. Why would he do that? Why would he do any of it? Everyone's thought about him stretching out his arms. Yeah, just limbering up, right? Stretching. Feeling the fit of the clothes. Yeah, he just put on his new clothes. showing that he can. Yeah. Mary, that he's no longer paralyzed. Yeah. Yeah. Part of seeing it now, he seems to already have reintroduced himself to his limb, right? Always stretch before merrymaking. Yeah, you don't want to pull something, right? During the merrymaking. Yeah, you gotta make sure to stretch first. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So yeah, I think he's probably stretching, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's limbering up for the merriment. That all works for me. That makes sense to me. Okay. All right. So today I was jumping right into the text after my brief sidelight on what we're doing here so that we could get through as much as possible. I had no idea we were going to spend such a long time talking about the last homely house. But you know what? That's because the addition of East of the Sea to the phrase last homely house is, I never noticed that. Never once. I've read The Lord of the Rings a lot of times. I have never noticed that. I always let that slide right past me. And once you guys drew attention to it at the beginning of our discussion here, whew, all of a sudden, right, this whole thing explodes. Right? And you can see the completely new meanings for that. That is so awesome. So, yeah. Oh, and I don't know what he's whistling. It's clearly a merry tune, no question. If I were to be doing it, yeah, which one? Which tune? That's what I'm thinking too, Flamifer. If there's one of the Hobbit songs that we know that he's whistling, could be The Road Goes Ever On. I don't think so. I think he's whistling Ho 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 to the Bottle I Go. That would be my top vote. It's possible that it could be the Bath song. That's also possible. The Old Troll song. It could be the Old Troll song. Tarlonio, he could be whistling Tra-la-la-lally. Presumably Bilbo tried to reproduce that for him. Cow Jumped Over the Moon. The Cow Jumped Over the Moon and the Old Troll were his last thoughts before he fell asleep, right? So I think, he could definitely be whistling either one of those. Those were on his mind right before he went to sleep, and he was thinking about Bilbo. So those are those are, I think, strong candidates. Tra-la-la-lally, though, yeah. When we get to the scene in Film, I will try to remember to have him whistle the same tune or a variant of the tune that we give to Tra-la-la-lally when we do our full orchestral song and dance number of Tra-la-la-lally in the Hobbit sequence. Totally. Yep. Okay, well, Fourth Dauntless likes to think it's the troll song. It's the very last one that he says before he falls asleep, and then Sam's about to walk into the room, so it's kind of fun. Whistle Sam's song and he comes is sort of fun. I like that. I'm totally down with that. I think that could work. Tra-la-la-lally, I think is pretty cool. All right. Edith Aldora on Twitch, I'm going to forget you made that suggestion. Certainly does not whistle Glenn Yarborough's The Greatest Adventure song. Worst song associated with a Tolkien production ever. Okay. Anyway, that is it for our class tonight. I'm going to let the Twitter folks go. We will have class next week. So next week is the first. So yeah, we'll have class next week. I'm going to be gone the week after that. So we'll have to skip a week there, the second week of June. But next week, first week of June, we'll be here as normal. So, all right. So I'll see everybody next week. So thank you to you guys there on Twitter for joining us. Feel free to join us at twitch.tv/SignumU. Thanks to the folks on the Talon there for joining me again this week. Always lovely to have you guys there. The Talon, in case, just for those of you who don't know of its existence, is a separate chat window that we have open to be more accessible to the vision impaired. Some people who have had a lot of trouble working, couldn't get into Discord and stuff. It was hard. So we have a special Google Hangouts window that we use for the vision impaired because it's easier for them. So thanks, guys, for joining us there again. And I'm going to say goodbye to the Twitter folks. Thanks to you guys. Good night. Okay. There we go.
Hi there.
Hi, Valorian.
So, hi there. So just a reminder, Pontin actually had a song he was going to...
Okay, so we're going to, before we go off on our field trip, we have a special song, right?
All right. So make some room here.
Hang on a second. Wait. Before you start the special song.
Okay, all right.
He's already doing a special song. Hang on. I got to make sure my audio's on. I think my... Okay, player music volume is on. Okay. Donor, boner. Young's old seed is still the same when the bony bone from its owner. Awesome. Very good, Pontin. Thanks for that.
That was well done.
Fabulous.
And that was taken from the Tolkien's recording of it too. So
yeah, very good.
That was very well done.
Excellent. Thank you, Pontin. That was very, very good. I'm always so the music stuff in Lotro is one of the things that I've still never really done myself, and I'm always so impressed by the arrangements people make.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if there were an additional 5 hours to my day, possibly.
Yes. Yes. Excellent.
Well done.
Awesome. Thank you, Pontine.
Thank you.
All right. So we're headed back to Kellendim today.
To do more exploring.
Having explored the docks last time, we're now going to go look at some buildings. So let's head out over to Erdloen. Okay. Sorry. Didn't get around the banister there. Okay. Here we go.
Yeah, I'm running into things. My fingers feel weird in the mess. I got super glue on my fingers and it still hasn't come off. That'll mess up your game.
Yes, it will. Okay. And
different stable. This stable.
Yeah.
By the time I figure that out, we're going to be going to some other stable point on the other side, like the Misty Mountains, and then I'll get stuck again, going to the wrong stable.
Exactly. Okay. Oh, Tawith, yes, I do want to see that spot near the Ward Spire. I'm thinking, though, let's look around in the buildings in Kellendim itself first, since we were there.
Yeah, we got lots of time for Thorn's Hall and Ward Spire, for sure.
Yeah. Ward Spire is, as I recall, kind of far away.
Yeah, that's closer. It's actually closer to the Thorn's Hall part.
Right. Exactly. So we'll get there. We'll totally get there. But
it's off of Gondaman. So we'll work our way there for sure.
Yeah, we'll get there. All right.
What can I do for you?
There you go. Just introducing myself to the stable master. All right. So we started at the docks and we were looking at the different docks, and I'm pleased with that way. I love the departure dock with the little trees. Now let's look inland here. So I'm looking at the... It's hard to look uphill. Certainly we can't get a...
Oh, look, we got all our banners up there.
Oh, yes. Right, the dragon. We've got the fire and the water.
Have those always been there? Is that new?
They've probably always been there.
I have no memory of this place.
And the stars. Yeah. Wait. They're missing the earth one?
Yeah.
No, wait, got the earth one. The earth one is
it's on the other side?
The tree. Right? This is the tree, this is the earth.
It doesn't go all the way around that.
We don't get the...
We are missing some. I can't figure out which one we're missing, but...
We're missing the air one. The one with the stars and the wind, right? Yeah. That's interesting.
Quite. But who are they for? Is that supposed to... It's not for people coming in. It's definitely for people going out. That's all everyone does here.
They face the harbor, yeah. I mean, there's no banners at all on the uphill side. Even though people coming down this staircase, right, are going to be looking square at that gazebo. Yeah, here we are. Yeah. Square at the bannerless side of the gazebo. So, people coming down these set of stairs, right, clearly
this
chopped liver as
treacherous,
far as this
railingless stair. Oh, they're going to be chopped liver if they fall off these stairs.
Yeah, that's certainly true. There'll be nothing left. Well, it's not that steep, you know. You won't even.
I know, but remember, this is one of the first worlds a lot of people visit, so it's very much like watching yearlings trying to navigate stairs.
Right. Interesting. Look, the same potted trees around as are out on the departure dock. Like, why would you put potted trees on the ground instead of just planting them?
Is the water salinous?
I don't know. I mean, it looks kind of rocky here, admittedly.
Oh, there's some trees here. It's not like where you get out to the ocean and everything's just coniferous nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah. Travel says maybe you take them with you to Valinor. Here's a little chunk of Middle Earth to remember as you
Well,
go
they
back
do
to
to give
Valinor.
dirt away as gifts, so why not?
Well, that's it, right? You take a little potted tree from Middle Earth. I could totally see
I
elves
give you
doing
dirt
that.
from my garden and air from my lungs.
Exactly.
Doctor Who joke.
Air from
Sorry.
my lungs. I get it. Yeah.
I give you air from
Season
my
1,
lungs.
episode 2, Ninth Doctor. So that means, remember when we were talking about elves packing? Well, maybe
Yes.
that's what they packed right there. That's why those aren't decorations. That's luggage on that dock. It's all making sense now. It's all
Okay, what kind of
making
tree
sense.
is this then? This is a coniferous. This is definitely some kind of
Evergreen?
pine, maybe
Oh, yeah.
some kind of evergreen thing.
Yeah, it's a needleless tree. Yeah.
Oh, it's Christmas trees.
They're bringing Christmas trees back
Bringing
with
Christmas trees.
them to Valinor. It's not very Christmas tree-like. It's kind of like Charlie Brown.
This is like the Christmas trees that we had when my family lived in Cyprus. It was a bush.
Okay, right. More of a Christmas shrub than a Christmas tree, exactly. Yeah. Well, you know what this makes me think of, though? Remember the branches of, what was it called? Oyolose? That the Númenóreans used to attach to their ships?
Okay.
And if it withered, it was a really bad sign?
Yes.
So that's what it kind of reminds me of. All right, hang on. Trifle, where...
Like a canary for the coal mine kind of thing?
Well, no, not exactly. It was like a sign of the blessing of the Valar in the Númenórean days. But this is not Númenor, but still, carrying an evergreen, with you.
Maybe tells you there's humans stowing away on board.
Yeah. Trifle, the Oyolose was definitely evergreen. And it's you can read about the Oyolose tradition in, I think I'm saying the name right, in Aldarion and Arendis, which everybody should read in preparation for the Amazon series. But
I got a big list.
yeah. So Trifle, where did you see a bigger one, like a tree of that same size but larger, outside of a pot, maybe?
Was it up at the shrine?
Yeah, I love.
Are we following this guy?
Wait, which one? Where
are we
we?
following? I don't know. I ran into an
following
NPC.
somebody?
Now I don't know.
Okay. All right.
Well, let's look around. Maybe we'll see some more of those.
All right.
The other thing is, maybe they just like the soil in the pot better than the soil out here.
Well, it's possible.
Well, actually, I just remembered. You know where we see pine trees up here is up in the cold mountains. That's the only place we see pine trees growing in the ground. Maybe they just don't naturally grow in the ground here. These are
right. Well, but these aren't exactly pines, though.
Okay.
It's not a pine.
All right. Well, admittedly, my graphics are pretty low, so.
Yeah.
But the bark texture looks like the pine texture.
It looks more like a
cedar.
Maybe. I don't know. Spruce, perhaps.
Of course, they brought forth juniper berries. They're juniper bushes.
Right. Anyway, okay. Bigger picture here. So the bigger picture is this is one of those towers. Now, this is like the towers we've seen in other places, like in the river, right?
Uh-huh.
This is like the one that's in the river. What are these towers meant to do? They're doorways. You can go up them. Though they're so narrow, it looks like they must have a lift inside them, or possibly just really, really narrow stairs.
No.
But the top is like that tower, right? Isn't it shaped like that? Yes, it is. It's shaped just like the tower on the cliff across the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the tower up on the other cliff down there. And like the one that was in the middle of the river that we saw around the corner there, you can just see it sticking up.
Yeah, they're like
there.
minaret shaped.
Yeah, we've got these minarets all over the place, which kind of are like lookouts, but let's face it, this is super inefficient for lookout towers. They can't just be a series of strategically placed lookout towers. There's another one. Look at that. Two of them practically on top of each other right there, right? So these are not this can't be strategically placed watchtowers. They have to be like recreational towers, right? You'd think, right?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe they just like being up high and looking around, you know?
Well, that's what I'm thinking, right? So if they're not functional watchtowers, and there's way too many of them to really justify that, you would have to think, therefore, that they must be, as I say, recreational. That like this is how this is a home
city full of space needles.
Yeah, I mean it's like these are like these are like elvish flats, except they're not flat, they're pointy. Right? I mean, like this is a residence or a I don't know what, like maybe an elvish Airbnb. I'm not sure. Like, do you stay in these towers while you're in?
You can't live in these trees.
Going west.
These trees aren't big enough to live in. Maybe it's sort of harkening back to that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Forthalis points out that elves do seem to like heights. Like the flats in Lothlorien. So maybe that's where the bedrooms go. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I'm imagining here. That these are places where you live or stay. Yeah, exactly. So their buildings are all tending towards towers, and we saw a tendency towards towers. Here's another one, right? Big old tower. Look at the windows. The building that we're right under here. I don't even know what this is, but the tower up there. Look at those fancy windows all around, right? You're going to have this circular chamber at the top, which is like super fancy and has all of this like crazy lighting from all of the windows, some which are partially tinted. In there. Yeah, all the way around. So it's going to be this like really crazy, beautiful, easy to see out of, but beautiful colored light kind of room up there at the top of this tower in the middle of this building. I don't know if that's the bedroom up there, but
well, also consider them kind of like widows' walks. How many of these people have people going off in boats or coming back?
Well, fewer coming back, presumably.
Well, there's merchants and fishermen, too.
Oh, yes, that's true.
Let's not discount them. This is still a seafaring town, even if not all of them come back.
Yeah.
The ones who live in these towers are not the ones who are planning on leaving anytime soon, unless it's like a hotel or something.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Like, on your way out of Rivendell, on your way out of Middle-earth, right, as you're, like, pausing here, then you might hang out here for a while. I mean, like a century is kind of like a long weekend for an elf, right? So you can stay here for a while.
The last homely truck stop.
Exactly. What's this building? Do we know what this building is? Can you go into this building? Is this building labeled?
No, it looks pretty big. Actually, I think this was part of the Scholars Archive no, that's up the hill. Never mind. That's up the hill. It looks like some sort of big library or archive, though. Some sort of big government building.
It's the biggest building down closest to the docks.
Maybe it's where the shipping charters are all, managed and stuff.
We can't go in, right? No.
Oh, I looked up the shape of the fronds of the trees in the pots. It's cedar.
It's cedar. It is cedar. Really?
Uh-huh. I have a whole bunch in my yard.
Okay. Okay, so these are potted cedars all over the place. I could live with that. It is
There's
almost like
kind of
a
biblical
custom
about cedar.
Yeah, there is. The cedars of Lebanon. Anyway, yeah. Fort Dauntless, it is like an elvish customs house. That's what it makes me think of too. Down here by the docks. Though, interestingly, I mean, I guess there's this walkway where we just were on the backside, which leads up, and there's a door over here. But
Yeah, see,
There's-
everything about this town is observing. This
Yeah.
observation deck, observation towers.
If you come in, so like if this is where the fishing comes in, right? And over there is where the merchants go out, where the dwarf is pacing back and forth.
Yep.
And the second one with the potted cedars is where people have packed their cedars for their next trip out to depart to the Grey Havens. So if you're over here, this building is super inconvenient for a customs house. Like there's no door that faces it. Like the doors all face away from the docks, one around the back and the other facing up the hill.
Yeah, you almost think the customs officer is just going to stand out front, and then you go into the building if there's a problem, maybe.
Right.
But
I mean,
maybe it just houses records of coming and going and manifests. And
it faces the rest of the town up the hill. Like this is obviously the front, right? It's got its back to the water. So it's down closest to the water, but it's got its back to it. And so therefore I don't think it's a customs house. Besides which, would elves have a customs house? Dwarves totally would. They'd be into that.
Oh, yeah.
They would totally be into that, but I'm not sure that elves would. They trade, we know that. But
what would be the purpose of a customs house for elves?
yeah, well, I mean, normally it's for tax collecting, right? I mean, that's the point of a customs house.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's not keeping a very watchful eye on the dock.
Yeah. Yeah,
Maybe
that's what I
it's
think. Maybe
ceremonial.
probably or administration.
Yeah, maybe it's ceremonial. Maybe that big tower with the really fancy room on top.
Well, if we follow this path up here, we see something that might be ceremonial for. I believe.
All right, let's see. Hang on, I'm running into a post. I'm all stuck here. Okay. Stuck and lagging. All right, hey, let's head up the hill here.
Yeah.
And then we'll look
Those
down
beautiful
river, and
purple
then we should
lanterns
probably
again.
stop. Ah,
Yep.
the purple lanterns. All right, hang on. I want to look at the house from here. Okay.
When twilight was a purpling.
Oh, that fancy room on top of it. I really want to go into that room now. I really want to see out those windows, see what it would look like from there.
Yeah, I bet that'd be really awesome.
Come on, Standing Stone people. Is that too much to ask? Can we get inside that big window? Just an instance?
Just one.
You don't have to open up the house and let us go up the stairs. Just, you know, let us click
I
on
don't
something.
think we're ever going to get a view out of a window.
Oh, you know, be just like you get the views off the watchtowers in Rohan. Surely we could do that. We get the views.
Yeah.
You can even get views in what's it called? In Illuminous. You can see views out the windows of the throne room.
Oh, yeah.
We can totally get views out the windows.
Sorry, I haven't quite got up to those high levels quite as often as I'd like to. So
Make it happen. Make it happen. Okay. Anyway.
But
so
yeah, up the hill here, we got our
so
little
we've
place
got
of
an
worship.
archway, which, okay. All right, so we're up here. And we've got a ruined tower.
Yep.
Why is our tower ruined?
I don't know. There's part of it down there.
There's part of it down there. That's
Next to
not
the
good.
shipwreck that's far away.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't fall. We're not getting you back for the rest of the stream.
What is up with this tower, though?
There's more ruined towers up that way that we can inspect
Ooh, I
and
see a
maybe figure
ruin
out
on
where
the
they're at.
hill. Oh, we've got to check out that ruin. This
There's
tower,
stuff.
this doesn't fit. This is I mean, look at this tower and look at all the other towers. We've got oodles of towers in this town, right? This town is obsessed with towers, and there's not a one of them that looks like this. Look at it, made of plain gray stone, overgrown with like moss and lichen and stuff and whatever. Like that could happen to any tower. But not to mention, of course, none of the rest of them are like that. Of course, none of the rest of them are ruined. But none of them look like this. None of them are made
That
out of
implies
stone.
that it has nothing to do with the they didn't have the desire to fix it. They just didn't have the ability. Maybe it's on bad ground now. Maybe it's shifting too much. Or it's going to fall into the channel.
Edith Aldora says it fell over out of embarrassment. It certainly looks like it is at least a different era of the town. By at least, I mean, or possibly built by somebody else entirely. Did somebody live here before the elves came and decide? I mean, that always seems a little bit risky. I mean, you kind of assume that the firstborn have been here first, but maybe they weren't here first.
The tiers on the side, they're vastly different from the sort of vaults that we get on the bottom of the Elven.
I mean, everything about the shape of this tower, the materials with which this tower is made, the clumsy design, the plainness of it, of most of it anyway. The top is much prettier. It's still got these gold things, the gold trim being shot through it, though. Yeah. Trifle, I agree. No windows, too. Look at that. Yeah, absolutely.
You can't even see on the second floor.
The bit that is fallen into the river, which is the fanciest bit of the tower, clearly.
Yes.
Looks
the
elvish.
Curly keys.
Yeah, the curly keys. Those are very elvish looking. When I look at the top of that tower, I have a hard time believing that anybody other than elves made that tower.
Yeah, we're just gonna have to check out the other runes and Calandum and compare.
Yeah, see if we can find any other examples of that, because I think we clearly have. I mean, assuming this is made by elves, which it definitely does not look dwarvish, doesn't have the marks of dwarvish architecture.
Oh, no.
Hobbits are obviously not going to make a tower like this. That's completely ridiculous. And we don't know any humans here in this area. Emma Thorne, I agree. It is logically possible that this tower was built by somebody else, and then the elves kind of tried to gussy it up when they got here, right? And we're like, you know what, this tower is pretty
fell over,
lame.
sank into the channel.
It needs some filigree work. Maybe if with some filigree work, it'll be good. And then they were like, you know what? It's not enough. Let's
slap
just
some gold on it.
Yeah. It's possible. I still doubt it. So, okay. So we would have a sort of now. Oh, and by the way, look at the positioning of this tower, right? This could have been just a functional watchtower. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Positioned right here by the entrance. From the top of that tower, you'd be able to see over that shoulder of the hill. So you'd be able to see not only this channel, but around the corner and the path of the rest of the river. Right.
Maybe a beacon.
Could be a beacon. Could be a lighthouse. Probably not a lighthouse. But could be, certainly could be a lookout tower.
By the look of the wrecked ship over there, maybe a lighthouse is necessary around here.
Well, you know, that does. I mean, there are some rocks here, but anyway, watchtower, lighthouse, whatever it was, is in a really good position. You can see from there, the top of that tower, you could see all the way up the river for quite a ways, and you could see around this corner and everything. So yeah, it would be a good watchtower position. So much more functional than the other towers, which seem to be, as we suggested, more recreational because too numerous to be merely watchtowers. So whoever it was came to build this first and built this before the rest of the town was built. They were like, we need a watchtower. So they were interested in the river, either defending it against people coming up or wanting to be on the alert anyway for people coming up, or they were navigating the river. They were people who were focused on the river alone and not on this place. Like, this was not yet a harbor. They weren't really bothered about living here. What is upstream from here? Upstream from here, up towards Illuminus, doesn't connect to Lake Evendim, but comes near it, and then up to the mountains near Forrick Hill. I don't see. I mean, as you can see from the big map, we are close to the. This is close to where the river narrows from, you know, the Gulf into a river. Anyway, well, we will consider this mystery as we move forward in Kellendam. Let us consider the ship then for a moment. Is that a wreck? I see people were asking that. I don't think it's a wreck.
You think they're building it?
Well, no, I think it's not got sails, admittedly, and it's got a whole bunch of strange rigging, which I don't understand. But then again, I'm not an elf, so maybe I wouldn't. But it looks like it's floating, right? I mean, I can see the rudder, and I can see...
True, it looks really big for something this shallow. It's
yes.
gotta be scraping its barnacles off on the bottom of that river.
Probably. But I don't know. It doesn't look like it doesn't look wrecked. It's not capsized. It's not, broken on the rocks or anything like that.
Yeah, it looks more broken from more of a distance. From here, you can see it actually is in the water, but it doesn't look ship shape.
Yeah, I thought it was the fact that it not only does not have its sails unfurled, but doesn't appear to have sails at all, is weird.
It's also right next to those really big rocks.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was. I think when I saw it from a distance, it looked like it was up on those rocks.
Right, exactly. No, from down by the back door of that building down there, it did look like a shipwreck from there. I saw it vaguely in the distance from there.
Don't know how much closer we can get.
And it would be weird. Sorry, excuse me, it's getting late. It would be weird to well, I've now entered a new section.
It looks like, it almost looks like a ship in a bottle where you're about to, take a hook and raise the sails, but they only got about halfway.
I don't think those masts are broken. I think they're just weird.
They just look collapsed a little,
They look collapsible, but they don't necessarily. I'm not convinced that they're. Yeah.
Looks more like a canopy than a sail. Like it'd be something you keep the sun off.
Yeah, like a tarp. Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Can sail in the rain.
Yeah. See, now Luke is suggesting that they maybe have to, because again, as we saw, Kellendim is right here at the place where the Gulf comes to the river. Maybe this curve is meant to be, where the Gulf comes in and finally narrows down. So it's river from here, like from this spot, so that by those rocks there is all the further that large ships can come up.
Oh, so they take a rowboat to the docks.
Yes, so they would they would need to be ferried from the
does
docks
make sense.
in a river-going ship.
And it did occur to me, considering how they're getting to Valinor, that ship might be a weird shape for a reason. Maybe it needs to be some sort of, maybe it needs to break something with a pointed bow that goes into a conical shape, or maybe it has to lose its back part with its energy blasts or something. I don't know.
Right.
I got 3-part rockets on the brain. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I hear that. It is possible. It is possible. It is also possible that some people were suggesting that this would be covered by a canopy, that those would not be sails, but this could actually be an Elvish river barge, which would then be just towed, essentially, instead of being like rowed or towed.
Yeah.
Instead of being sailed. I don't know why it would need quite so much mast work there if it were not going to be sailed at all. But I don't understand.
Kieran, explain yourself.
Yeah, they look weird. But again, not an elf. Kieran presumably knows what he's doing.
He's been making boats thousands of years longer than you have, and he thinks he knows what he's about.
Exactly. So, yep. All right. So yeah, you can't swim to it, right?
No.
Oh well. All right. Well, I think I'm gonna go with that they ferry folks out from the docks to there. I think I like that.
Yeah, I like that too.
I think I like that. Okay. All right.
I'm actually quite happy to know there's not just the ship moldering out there.
Yeah, no, it's not a shipwreck. That would be rather a blight on the Elvish harbor here. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to sign off here. We covered a lot. We covered like a building and a half, and we discovered a mystery. We have an architectural mystery to solve now. We have the we have the history of Kellendim to try to figure out based on the archaeological evidence. So
just we thought we were done with ruins.
Exactly. We have our work cut out for us here. I had forgotten that there were ruins here, right? That's kind of unexpected.
I forgot they were different than these buildings.
Yeah, I know. I never noticed that before. So
that.
Lots more to discover. So we will return to this next week. Thanks, everybody. Good night, and I will see you guys next Tuesday. Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks for joining me on this epic exploration of The Lord of the Rings and of Standing Stone's video adaptation of Tolkien's story. If you are having even half the fun I'm having on this journey, I hope you will consider supporting the project by donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.